Hey, today on the show, we have Andrew Thorp King. He is a record label owner, author, banker, and so much more. And while his last book was a spy novel, his latest book, Failure Rules, is where he discusses his 5 rules of failure and how you can use failure as a tool to learn from. So I'll be honest, I was not familiar with a lot of the bands on his record label, but I am a huge fan of self-help books and the topic of success and failure. I had a lot of questions, and Andrew has a lot of answers. So it's a fascinating discussion. It's coming right up. Please welcome Andrew Thorp King. How are you doing?
Great, Chuck. Thanks for having me here. Nice to talk to you. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, we finally got it happen. Glad that you're feeling better. And it actually worked out better because it gave me time to finish your book. I had read most of it, but I was a little bit behind just because of the holidays and everything. So now I was able to finish the whole thing. And it's great stuff. Good, very educational. I guess my first question is, where did you come up with the idea of that failure is good? Because I know when I was a kid, failure was not good. I think for me, when I first realized, oh, failure is okay, was with the book Growth Mindset came out. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes. Yeah. So failure is good, right? So I guess I would just nuance that a little bit and say, I'm not saying that failure is necessarily good in and of itself, right? The tagline of the book is after it sucks, failure rules, right? So it does first suck, right?
Right.
So there is an element to it where it is not good. It is still to be avoided in most cases, right? Unless it's kind of just the iterative micro failures of a learning process of a pursuit. But other than that, failure can be good. It can rule, but it takes a mindset to accomplish that, I think, right? So that's kind of what I learned through decades of kind of entrepreneurial, off-road adventuring through my 20s and 30s and all the different things I did, from running record labels to being a spy novelist to owning a gym to doing all kinds of things in the finance and banking space. It's like, what are the lessons of failure that I've learned? And that's really what the process of writing this book really unraveled and revealed to me, right? And so I think the actual rules of failure in my book for the audience is the failure rules, the 5 rules of failure for entrepreneurs, creatives, and authentics. So I think it's really, the rules really, are a roadmap to how to extract and pull value from almost any failure. And so, if you can view them from the lens of these rules and the lessons that collapse under these rules, I think then failure can be good, right? But I don't think it's automatically good. It really takes, I think, an intentional approach to failure to make them good.
Right. And then it's learning from the failure. If you keep making the same mistake over and over, well, then you're not going to get anywhere. But if you learn from that failure, you get hit hard and you're down and out, kind of like you were when your record label went under and you get divorced, and it's like you're at the rock bottom, and some people might jump off a cliff, and you climbed out of that and were able to write this book and do all sorts of other good stuff.
Yeah. And so I would say it's not even just mistakes, right? Mistakes are kind of the obvious reflexive idea of what failure is. It's that gap in decision making, right? It's the having a plan with holes in it that didn't work out because you probably could have had some foresight that might have avoided it. That's a piece of it, right? That's a part of failure. But then there is just the failure that enshrouds you just because we live in an unsafe world, because the free market is not predictable, because people are not predictable, because just being a mere participant in the human condition can cause you to encounter the effects and the symptoms of failure, whether it's war or sickness, whatever it might be. So I think it's also rooting yourself in a philosophical mindset that prepares for those things, whether it be kind of the non-faith tradition of Stoicism or some sort of faith framework or some sort of philosophical grounding. I think that is also a big piece of helping yourself prepare for failures, so that when they do occur, you can kind of objectively observe your experience versus kind of having an emotional participation in your experience. And then you can find ways to, like the phoenix, emerging from the fire. The phoenix must burn to emerge. You can find ways to see how, oh, maybe this failure is actually burning something off of me that needed to die. Old thinking needed to die. Old ways of being needed to die. And to see that chaos as a force that not necessarily is going to crush you, although it could be a threat, but a force that you then step back and find a way to steer that energy into something that create a rebirth in you. And think of the world as a wider place. Think of new ways you can reinvent yourself, and really evaluate what is my unique talent stack, and how can I find ways to use that to give the world, a flavor of my highest usefulness. And I think failure can help us do that. It can help us grow and help us evolve. But you really have to be introspective. You have to, in some ways, almost think about it ahead of time, premeditatively.
So with all the things that you've done, like you said, writing spy novels and a record label, you had a gym and you're a banker. What was the most financially lucrative of those things? And then also what was the most fun of all those things that you've done?
Right. So, I mean, what you're talking about is kind of the dichotomy of money and meaning, which I talk about in the book, as you know, right? It's
Yeah.
like, how do you marry money and meaning? And they're both important, right? But to sacrifice one for the other, you're going to have a deficiency. And I talk about a portfolio of pursuits so that if one is more heavily weighted on money or heavily weighted on meaning, the balance of your pursuits might create a composite by which, on the aggregate, you can have more of a achievement of 100% fulfillment in both the money bucket and the meaning bucket. And I think for me, there's always been that composite. I mean, even now, my most lucrative, active pursuit would be as an executive banker for an online technology bank that services the fintech space, the financial technology space. So, helping kind of those cool apps of the world, the Chime, the PayPal, the Venmo, helping companies like that move money in more interesting, efficient, quick ways, instantly, cross-border, and all of that. That is probably my highest lucrative pursuit, or it most definitely is at this point. And it carries a lot of meaning too, but it's probably not the highest meaning. I mean, for me right now, currently, it's the energy and the passion I have around this book, the evangelizing of the message of this book and all the different ways that it's kind of evolving, from the book itself, from YouTube videos, from doing the podcast, the merchandise company that I created around the ideas. It's all of that. But even that, right? Like that is almost like this overarching, compartment by which it's evangelizing my other, passions that I've had throughout the years. The constant, never-ending connection to music, the passion that I have for music, and how, the music and the message, particularly of the hardcore punk and metal scene, drives and is an anthem and a soundtrack in all that I do, and really buoys my spirit day in and day out. From a recovery standpoint, from failure and hard times, to a motivational standpoint to catalyze action when I need to get shit done. And then the other passions, my love of the cigar culture, and how that is really kind of, an elixir and an accent to my life that really gives flavor and adds friendship and, just all kinds of daily joy. So, I think the short answer really is it's that portfolio pursuit mindset to create a integrated structure in your life where through different means you're achieving different levels of fulfillment from a financial standpoint and from a meaning standpoint.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things you talk about in the book that I found it really interesting, just because I know a lot of people like this, is the term safety file. I've never heard this. I don't know if you coined this phrase, but basically a safety file is somebody who is irrationally attached to preserving safety within their personal and work life above all other motivators and values. And that just is so important, I feel like, because I think there's too many people that fall into that category, that they're unhappy, but they don't want to take a risk. And they're just so caught in their, stuck in their ways, especially at my age. And a lot of those guys will go through this in their, late 30s, early 40s, kind of like a midlife crisis, basically. And they don't take the jump, and then they're just miserable. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how can people get out of that mindset, or can they?
Yeah, I don't know if they can, right? If you're so stuck in that, where that's just your way of being, and you never really stepped out of that lane and kind of, expanded those guardrails that you've artificially placed in your life. I don't know exactly how you step out of it, but I know it's a problem. I know that the fact that it's not been a problem for me has allowed me to really live life to the fullest and destroy future regret. Because if something burns inside me, I am going to pursue it either until it fails, partially succeeds, or fully succeeds. And whatever the outcome is, I'm going to be satiated because I know that I'm never going to look back and wonder what if on these things. So whether it's competing in bodybuilding, writing the spy novel, starting my own record labels, opening a gym, all these things, when something burns in me, I'm going to go after it. And failures have come and will come. But in the end, like, there's so much that I learned, and just being able to have the opportunity and the drive and the audacity to take that risk, to step out of that Safetyfile perspective and chase after things. I mean, it's been the thrill of my life. I mean, I have this Jesse Isler quote in the book. Jesse Isler, who was, who is, wildly successful entrepreneur, owns an NBA team. He's a rapper, all of that. Married to Sarah Blakely, the billionaire who started Spanx. And his quote is, my life has been ready, fire, aim, and it's been one of adventure, right? And so I can remember there was somebody in my life who almost sarcastically, commented about me when I was doing something that seemed crazy, like, oh, that's him again, going ready, fire, aim. It's like, fuck yeah, that's right. That's exactly what I do, right? And it's not ready, fire, aim in some blind way necessarily. It's more kind of a modified version of that, where it's ready, approximate your aim, and adjust your aim in flight, right? So it's not a thoughtless ready, fire, aim, wholesale 100%, right? But it is that idea that if you're waiting for perfect conditions to pursue something difficult, to pursue something meaningful in your life that is not orthodox, or that will require some real risk, if you're waiting for perfect conditions, good luck. You're probably never going to get started.
Yeah. Do you find it hard to be around people like these Safetyfiles? Did you have some friends growing up who were fit in that category? And did you find yourself outgrowing them, spending less time with them? Or do you find yourself connecting with more entrepreneurs as you do more different kinds of avenues and things?
So first, just to comment back on the term itself, I think, coin that phrase. I never heard it anywhere else. I just kind of came up with it, and it's part of the definition of terms in the book. And I've always been attracted to those that are looking for unusual achievements, and not necessarily in terms of like material wealth, but unusual achievements, right? The case studies in the book are people that have taken an unorthodox paths that don't have some sort of college issued degree with a blueprint attached to it and some sort of linear framework, and found a way to get their hooks in success in unusual ways, whether it's Henry Rollins and Black Flag, embracing punk rock poverty and eating dog food on the road to get to where he is to now, where he's having this meaningful influence on on the scene and on the world. Whether it's comedian Jim Norton, who decisively decided to not take jobs that might lure him away from his passion, and instead took jobs that were more meaningless on purpose, but freed up his mind to think about how he would chase after singularly his career in comedy, things like that. So whether it's these virtual mentors or people in my life, that is who I try to surround myself and attract myself to, not to like the exclusion of, being friends with other people, but I certainly delineate between the two. And in terms of who I admire, it's those that take the risks like that. And I've always been kind of impervious to the Safetyfile attitude in those that have them in my life. I mean, I have this quote from Leo Tolstoy in the book around, the best solution is to be kind and good and ignore the opinions of others. And that's kind of been my motto. Like, all right, you think that, about, what I'm doing or what somebody else is doing because you're stuck in this mindset. I'm not going to hate you for it, but I'm going to kindly ignore that opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The one you mentioned the case studies. You have so many great ones in the book. Some personal things and that people that you knew, and then obviously some that you read about or whatever. But the one that I thought was really interesting too was the pink slip bowler story. Can you just kind of summarize that for my audience? I don't want to spoil too much of the book here, but this is a really good one that hopefully will get people interested in the book.
That's really cool that you like that one. That was one that I was particularly attached to and was happy to have kind of found and blended into the book, right? So Thomas Smallwood, who's a professional 10-pin bowler, he was working at a Ford plant in Michigan, and the grind, blue collar job, that kind of lifestyle, and he got a pink slip. He got laid off from the Ford plant. It actually correlated with the experience I had getting laid off from a Ford credit office job where I was a collector, and I got my own pink slip there that really gave me a failure space to explore my desire to start my record labels. And in that failure space, I did do that. And Thomas Smallwood did a similar thing. He got this pink slip, and he is quoted as saying, getting laid off was one of the worst things that ever happened to me, but it led to the best results, right? And for him, the best results was in that failure space, in that emptiness. He was able to step back and use that chaos as an idea engine. And he kind of saw this desire he had to be a professional bowler. And, with little means, he scraped up $1,500 and I don't know what tournaments they were, I forget, but entered some local tournaments. And while he was laid off from the Ford plant, found his way to becoming a professional bowler. He got a call to be recalled back to his job. And he was able to tell them on the phone, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take the job. But if you want to see me on ESPN tomorrow, tune in, because he had become a professional bowler in that empty failure space because of the risk he took, with little means to go pursue that. I mean, in parallel, he was looking for another job. He wasn't impractical about it. And that's another key thing. None of this is about doing anything without having a practical plan to kind of buoy you and give you structure as you go after your dreams. But I found that to be a really cool story. Just this past year, there's been a network show with comedian Pete Holmes playing Smallwood. It's called How We Roll, I think it's called. Kind of a sitcom show, which I don't think really does justice to kind of the core of his story. But I like Pete Holmes and what have you. So it's just kind of cool that the story made it into a TV show.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. So and then the second rule in your book is failure. Failure book is nothing is safe. And this always reminds me, you didn't put this quote in there, but this reminds me of the Jim Carrey quote. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where he tells the story about how his dad, he wanted to be a comedian. He could have been a really great comedian, but he wanted to do the safe thing. So he took this bookkeeping job, and then he gets laid off. And so that's when Jim Carrey learned, well, you might as well chase doing what you love, because even if you try to take the safe route, sometimes even the safest route is not safe.
Well, exactly right. I mean, that's the illusion of it, right? Like, what exactly does safe even mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's degrees of safety for sure, right? But if you're financially safe, but you're stuck in a job where essentially, like Thoreau, described in his quote, that you're living a life of quiet desperation, how safe really is that? Because it's really not safe for your mental health. It's not safe for your emotional health. It's not safe for the wholeness of your being. So how safe is it? So it's a matter of those competing values, right? And I have the example in the book of the show Dirty Jobs, Mike Rowe, and I had an episode called Safety Third, which didn't really mean safety needs to be third arbitrarily, but more that, hey, safety ought not always be first, just by default. You need to weigh competing priorities against safety and see where it really ought to lie in the hierarchy, in the ranking. And it's really kind of, combating that Safetyfile mentality.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't think I think there's different levels, but I think it is good. As David Goggins, I know you're a fan of too, says, you need to get out of your comfort zone. I see, for me, I don't think I'm ever going to be the guy that's going to go free climbing, at 10,000 feet. Just if I slip and fall and die, it was worth it. Like, to me, that's not worth the risk. But I think there's somewhere in between doing that and taking the safest job and never leaving your house too. I think you should take some risk, get out of your comfort zone somewhat.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, look, I'm a banker, right? So risk management is part of my job. I think about risk all the time. That always has to be weighed against growth, reward, you're finding the adjacent possible. And it's always a balance, right? It's the idea of, that Jordan Peterson has popularized with chaos and order in the balance. If you have too much of a surplus of either chaos or order, things will go wrong. If you have too much chaos, you can't function. If you have too much order, you're so comfortable, you're not growing. So I think it really is finding that balance between risk and relative safety. Because again, I don't really think anything is fully safe, right? There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be deficiencies in the different elements of our needs for fulfillment.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that the other day with the football game where the guy gets hit in the chest and passes out and collapses. Like, I mean, you're going to probably take a risk playing football and maybe get hurt, but you don't think you're going to, go unconscious for 10 minutes. So, I mean, it's like, you just never know. But I'm sure he's glad that he's fulfilling his dream of playing in the NFL and those kinds of things. And, sometimes like bad stuff happens even when you least expect it. So just like Jim Carrey's dad, like, you could try to be as safe as you want, but then you could still lose your job anyway. So at least You want to go out, living your dream, I think. And that seems to be what you're doing. The other rule that you have in there, money, you talk about money. This was a really fascinating chapter to me. And especially, I think you quoted Adam Carolla talking about envy and how, you used to be, and this is how it was when I was a kid. My dad would kind of use success as a motivator and a tool. Like, hey, you want to drive this car, you want to have this nice house, you got to work hard, you got to go to college. That was a big thing back then. And now it's like people reject that. They reject accomplished people and successful people and complain about, like they're taking too much and we're not getting our fair share and those kinds of things. So yeah, talk about that. Like, cause I think you grew up with a similar mindset that was, wealth was evil.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, I have a chapter in there called, Punk Rock, Son of a Preacher Man. Right. So my old man was a religious preacher. I was a punk rocker, and kind of both sensibilities eschewed kind of, looking at money as a good thing or looking at wealth accumulation as a good thing. They both kind of shunned them. I think what I learned over time is both sensibilities were really wrong. Like I'm still a punk rocker. I love that culture, but I came more from the hardcore scene, more from like the New York hardcore scene, where it was like, you didn't just, talk about a problem. You just didn't just sing about a problem. You were looking for a higher solution. So you had bands like Shelter and the Cro-Mags invoking even religion with the Hare Krishna faith, or you had, the straight edge movement. You had these kind of like yearnings for something higher, some sort of solution, even if transcendental, right? For me, I think I eventually realized, well, there are some perils to money, right? The love of money isn't the root of all evil, but the love of money can be. Right? If you go into the failure edge territories of either greed, which everybody, looks at as being bad, but not enough people, I think, recognize that envy is truly kind of the equivalent, malevolent twin sibling of greed. They're one and the same. Poor people could be greedy in their envy in the same way that greedy people can be, ethically flawed and morally deficient in their, chase for money where they're, hurting people. Right. And I think we really need to kind of recognize that. And at the same time, view money out, in the mid space where you say, all right, money is an agnostic tool. It's not good or bad in and of itself. But if we can find a way to use it as a thank you note, where, every time we have a transaction, it's it's us placing value on something that represents our measured thankfulness, then it can truly be a force multiplier of goodness, of blessing, of lifting people out of poverty, of providing a life for them where they can find meaning and fulfillment. That's obviously still connected to us using our talents and in giving them to the world. And I think seeing it holistically through all its kind of dynamic touch points and effects can really help us as we go about, setting our goals and viewing our work life and how we earn and spend money. That's essentially what that chapter is about. It's the idea that failure rule number 3, money is spiritual. Again, obviously, if used correctly and not used. Well,
because I think people with a lot of money can also help the world a lot. I mean, what is the quote? Like Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Like, so if you think people are too selfish with their money, then you need to be less selfish with your money and be more generous. Like, I don't know if we go back to that football player. I hate to keep bringing that up, but there was a fundraiser for him, and the Washington Commanders, which is like a $5.6 billion franchise, donated $5,000, and this little mom and pop carpet store donated $5,500. They donated more than the $1 billion franchise. So it just goes to show you, like, I mean, just because you can have money and you can share that money and you don't need a lot to make a bigger difference than someone with a lot of money.
That's right. And at the same token, a lot of money does give you more power to be more generous, right? So I think there's a double edge to that. And part of the motivation for many people I know who have been successful and have money is because they do have some higher, what I would call a thing to North Star ambition. When I talk about failure rule number 4, thing 1 and thing 2 dependency, thing 1 being your enabler pursuit that might help you reach your thing 2 aspirational North Star dream. I go through the example of billionaire John Huntsman, grew up poor in a poor household, and built his companies, the Huntsman Corporation, which made those clamshell cases for McDonald's sandwiches. But his motivation was to eventually do something more altruistic, which was the Huntsman Cancer Institute, which has now done so much good for working towards a cure for cancer and helping cancer patients and people suffering from cancer. Where his goal now is, even though he's a billionaire, well, he's passed, but his goal was to try to spend as much of that money as possible in that good, right? And so I think, I think when you see people who view money that way and then are successful and literally use it for that type of goodness, I mean, that's a great model. And it doesn't have to be on that scale where you're a billionaire. I mean, you can be 100,000-aire and still use that for lots and lots of good. And so, I try to look at that as a guidepost and model for my life.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. There's this whole like hatred for billionaires that it seems to be going around lately, even though, it's like you talk about like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, like a lot of people do not like them because they're billionaires. But yet I feel like those people contributed to society. They are created products that we all use. I mean, unless you're not using a computer, an iPhone, or Amazon, which you're missing out if you aren't, but I think the solution isn't to take money from them and to knock the billionaires down. I think it's more billionaires. I think we need more people, more entrepreneurs, more people competing. What is Amazon's competition? What we've got two different kinds of phones, iPhone or Android. Like, why isn't there like 10, 20, or 30 different kinds of phones or computers? Like, and maybe then those pieces of the pie will even out. Maybe Bezos and Gates won't be billionaires, but maybe they'll still be wealthy, but there'll be more wealthy people. That'd be my theory on that.
Sure. I think there's a couple things there, right? I think competition is and can be good, but at the same time, I think there's a higher kind of unique value and impact that can be found in trying to be the only of something new versus the best of something old. So Srinivas Rao, who's a writer I really respect, is actually helping me out with some of my navigation of the book world now. He wrote the book, Only is Better Than Best, which is also a concept Peter Thiel of the PayPal Mafia talks about in From Zero to One. And it's the idea that you're not always, you want to find that new space. And a lot of times that's the intersection of two disparate ideas, right? And how you can make two things that don't seem to go together, have them go together, then you're the master and the only of those things going together. I mean, for a musical example, you could think of like the Dropkick Murphys. Like, they might not be the best punk band, they might not be the best Irish band, but they're probably one of the best Irish punk bands. Maybe Flogging Molly's a close second, who knows, depending on your taste, right? But it's that idea. And I think that even is more interesting and more expands the world, right? So it's taking two disparate ideas, intersecting them, and being the only of something new versus just competing against something old. But to your point, regardless of what you think of Jeff Bezos or these other billionaires, they absolutely have changed the world. And the reward for that should be at the scale by which the world has been changed by their ideas and their efforts. I mean, scale matters. It's not about how hard you work. It's not even about how smart you are. Luck is a factor too, but again, luck is the residue of design typically. And their design produced something that has blessed the world in a highly scalable fashion. And I think the rewards should be as such.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I'm also reminded of the Mark Cuban. Well, I don't know if he said this or this is his original quote, but I've heard him say this. It's like when hogs get fat, they get slaughtered. And sometimes these companies do get too greedy. And my favorite example of this is Blockbuster. Because I remember I don't think people remember how much everyone hated Blockbuster, because now everyone looks back on it with such fondness, like, oh, Blockbuster, the good old days. And it's like, no, people hated Blockbuster. They were such just jerks about the late fees and all that. They charge you so much. And it was just, they'd rip off and they would kill all the mom and pop video stores. And then Netflix came along and actually tried to do a deal with them. And they're like, no, we're too good for you. And then Netflix knocked them off the throne. It was amazing. I loved it. It made me so happy.
I mean, what you're talking about is the perils and the dangers of overreach, right? You get in a monopolistic situation, it's very, you're susceptible to that type of overreach and egregious, greed actions, right? Which again, I talk about in the book. I mean, there's definitely this lane I'm trying to stay in where greed and envy are the edge territories of failure you want to stay out of. But if you stay within the lane, money can be an amazing thing to lift society up and to lift individuals up, even more importantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the fourth rule is talk about the building thing one and thing two. So it's like basically the way I understood it was like your thing one is kind of like basically the thing that's going to pay the bills, and hopefully it relates to your pursuit or your passion, which would be the thing two. So like you have this dream, maybe you want to be an author. So then you're doing something during the day to help pay the bills so you can work on writing a book.
Right. So yeah, it's that idea. So from a very simplistic stance, it could be just that. It could be literally just banging down a 9 to 5 has could be a very low meaning job, but it gives you that scaffolding, that structure to then chase your dreams on the side with a little less risk and take a little more risk on what you're chasing on the side. But then there's more creative ways to approach it that might accelerate a potential achievement of that North Star dream. So I go through examples of, Chris Wren from Bridge 9 Records, who went out, and his enabler pursuit to start Bridge 9 Records was to start another company. He used a less passionate pursuit. He started Yankee Suck, making merchandise to sell to Boston Red Sox fans. And that money then underwrote like first 15, 16, 17 Bridge 9 releases. Some could say it's throwing good money after bad. Obviously, that was profitable. Why would you throw it after something more risky? But he had to have the meaning and the passion for Bridge 9 to be fulfilled. And he used the money from a lower meaning pursuit to do that. So it wasn't a 9 to 5, but it's still the thing one, thing two dependency. For me, I've kind of had, several different flavors of that. One was when I started out in the music industry, I had jobs in the music industry. So I was literally getting a paid education in the music industry, meeting contacts, networking, which tremendously helped me start my record labels, which I did on the side at night in the cracks of life. And then even now, with a more wider variety of pursuits that are disparate. I mean, even my job, as an executive fintech banker today, the skills I learned there in communication and project management, and dealing with the simultaneity of many things happening at once has really helped me lay out my multi-year plan for, promoting this book and all the things attached to the book. So like you can really transpose skills from what seems to be a low-meaning job into your North Star pursuit. And in the end, if you're actually reaching those goals, it makes that job or your enabler pursuit, whatever it might be, even more meaningful. There's a connectivity between the two and a synergy where all of a sudden you have this rich narrative to tell about how you reached your North Star pursuit. Back to the Bridge 9 story. What a cool story. He tells it all the time, that's how the label was really funded and started. And it gives more flavor and more texture to his story, which is awesome. So it's like that idea that you can't really always go straight at a pursuit. You got to kind of go circuitously sometimes and do creative things to bring it into reality over time.
Yeah. So then for you, it's right now you're doing the banking is kind of your thing one. And then the book is thing two. Is that your ultimate thing two? Would you rather just be an author full time?
Well, and everything attached to an author, right? With a speaker, coaching, doing media stuff. I have a merchandise company. I started with the two Soul and Fire Supply Company, which echoes a lot of the, the themes and ethos of the book. But I have other entrepreneurial things that I'll do too. But this is what I focus on for the next 3-5 years, try to build this up, build up an audience, and write other books. I also still own the record labels and still go in and out of activity with the record labels, Thorp Records and Sailor's Grave Records. So for your audience, Thorp Records has worked with bands like Madball, Sheer Terror, Slapshot, Blood for Blood. Sailor's Grave has worked with bands like Roger Brett and the Disasters, The Business, Coffin Cats, The Creep Show, Goddamn Gallows, and many others. I always, have kind of like two that are more like my thing one and thing two, but then I also have either other ones that are subordinate but still active. And then, I always have kind of a redundancy of ideas waiting on the ready should they need to be invoked, right? So there's always something. I'm always thinking of something to pivot to or replace something if it needs to be.
Okay. So rule number 5 is that you're not your failures. And you talk about like using rejection as fuel. I love that because I definitely, especially when I started the podcast, I was getting a lot of rejection, a lot of trolling and those kinds of things. And I use that stuff as fuel. For you personally though, was there any rejections that you used as fuel, either positive ones like an almost band, a big band that you almost signed, or just like a really nasty thing where you maybe wanted to prove that person wrong or something?
A little bit. I don't find that proving people wrong is really good, healthy motivation, but at the same time, it can be a good way to prove to yourself that whatever was being kind of like spoken at you or projected to you is not true. that can
Right.
really help you kind of like prove to yourself necessarily.
That's a
Not
better way to
necessarily
say it. Yeah.
get
Yeah.
back to somebody, right? And so
Yeah.
I
Because they
experienced
probably
that.
don't care anyway. So,
Right. I mean, I feel like revenge or proving somebody wrong is not really sustainable motivation.
no.
But it can be something that can really restore, buoy your own confidence in your own ability. So when I owned with various partners over time, online lending companies, both onshore with a license in Delaware and offshore with a license in the country of Belize, and that unraveled over time. And the last partner I had, there was all kinds of schisms that occurred between the two of us, and he was pretty, abusive in his depiction of my abilities from a character assassination standpoint. He would, kind of overpraise me when I was doing what he wants or when things were going well, and then he would, over devalue my efforts when they weren't. And so I think as I began to ascend in my corporate career in banking in the fintech space, just the contrast between how he kind of viewed my competency and how my competency actually played out in the world. That was satisfying, but again, not in a revenge standpoint, just in a like, yeah, okay, I withstood that, didn't believe it then, and further proved the reality that wasn't really accurate as I stepped into my next pursuit.
I love it. But and so then was there any like with your record label, for instance, was there any bands that you almost signed that you maybe got rejected, but it was like it was motivating because it was like, wow, I almost got Bad Religion or whoever.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of one that I mean, there was a bunch that I was chasing after. I don't even know if I almost got them, but I really kind of wanted, that might have been, looking for a label at a certain point. Was competing. There was a time where I was talking to Terror, and that never moved forward. Yeah, but that was just, there was a lot to go after in those times. It's probably a little different now.
Yeah.
I never really let that trip me up. I mean, my issue was probably more being overzealous with spending on promotion on the big bands I did get, where even if they sold a lot, I lost money for years before I recouped, right? And that caused trouble. So, I mean, it was the over enthusiasm of trying to make a record pop,
Okay. So then with that record label, do you still own that record label? Like the music that you had on there, is that on Spotify now getting some streams and some money, or have you just sold it off?
Yeah. I mean, they're the one label is more of a catalog label. Thorp Records haven't released anything since 2009, but there's like 80 something releases that I own the IP rights to, so it's available on the streaming platforms. And there's some physical product out in the market too. Sailor's Grave was more of an active focus. After that, and so that too is all still out there and available. So they're still active and live, and on the rights between the two labels of like over 120 releases and half as many merchandise rights. And it's mostly passive income, but I go in and out of activity. So there's still some bands that I'm still connected with and working with that are more recent releases, and active bands like the Coffin Cats, the Goddamn Gallows, Flatfoot 56, who's an Irish Celtic punk band from south side of Chicago, actually played my wedding. So there's still definitely, a connectivity there. It's just more focused, and I have the ability to kind of, push play and pause, as I want for the most part. But the revenue still keeps coming in,
Okay. So like one of the things you talk about this is a good chapter. I think it's called When You Hit a Rock, Let It Push You Into a New Stream. And then you have a quote from J.K. Rowling, who obviously wrote the Harry Potter books or whatever. Rock bottom is the solid foundation I rebuilt my life on. So, I mean, you've had obviously some big obstacles, the divorce, the record label floundering. I think that in one point in the book, you talk about how you actually had to get on government assistance even. Was that your rock bottom?
I mean, that was part of it. I mean, that was part and parcel. That followed personal bankruptcy that I went through when the record labels, basically were underwater, and I didn't know that they would ever have value again because the digitization of music had not matured, and I didn't know that was going to happen. And even if I knew it, like there was still no money then, right? Like that took time to actually happen, but it enabled me to still have the record labels, but I had to go through a personal bankruptcy. I then, could not find a job and was entrepreneurial minded anyway. And most jobs that I thought I could get weren't going to pay the bills the way I needed them to. So I went into financial planning. That was kill or be killed, started my own practice. And that was difficult. And I was in the Midwest, and 2 years into it, the '08 financial crisis hit. I was in the auto belt close to Detroit, Northwest Ohio, and mostly Jeep workers, and they're canceling their accounts. And, I was working hard all day, all night, wearing the suits. All the optics would look like there's no reason I should not be able to pay the bills or what have you. But I hadn't recovered the bankruptcy. The savings hadn't been there. They got burned through. And sales cycles were long, and I wasn't really getting the commissions I needed. And yeah, I had to succumb to public assistance, and it was a real moment of shame for me. Not that I didn't need it, but it was in such furious conflict with my work ethic. It just didn't make sense. I was literally doing everything I could and thinking of ways to reinvent myself, and I still fell to that. And this idea of like charity filling in the gaps of people or family, like that can help a little bit. At the end of the day, like I don't think the government should really be artificially propping people up through that. But when the gaps are there and they can't be filled in through charity, and you're doing everything you can to try to find a way to pick you up by the bootstraps, it was helpful. And I go through some examples in the book about Stephanie Land, who wrote The Maid, and there's a Netflix show about her. I use kind of her examples of her experience being on public assistant, my own. Roger Moret from the band Agnostic Front, his upbringing of being on public assistance and his thoughts on that, and how he kind of really delineated between a hand up and an egregious kind of abuse of the system. And so talking about those kind of nuanced, delicate views on the topic is in the book for sure.
Yeah, I think that you used it properly. I think that's how it was designed, because I think when those programs first came out, I may be wrong on this, but I thought it was it FDR or one of the Roosevelts, and it was during the Great Depression. And then basically people needed it to survive. And then of course, we got through the Great Depression. And I think for you used it at a time when things were really bad. It was rough. You needed it. And now you're obviously not using it or not needing it. So why do you think that, because the chapter's called the necessity of shame, food stamps suck and gratitude rules. And using, shame in a constructive way. Why do you think some people, though? See, I think that's the problem with the government assistance that we have in this country now, is that some people never get off of it. And to me, it feels like it's almost like a prison for them. Like the government is keeping them down instead of propping them back up and saying, okay, we'll help you get back on your feet. Now let's figure out your purpose, your thing one, your thing two, as you would say. Why was it easier for you think, rather than other people? Do you think they just don't have the motivation to do that?
Well, I don't know if it was easier for me, but it was the shame that really motivated me. It was the idea that the disdain for your circumstances is the power you need to get out of them. It goes back to Benjamin Franklin's quote where he says, I am all for helping the poor, but the best way to help them is to make them uncomfortable in their poverty. I mean, you don't want them to starve, but you still need to have a degree of sharp discomfort to make you realize that this is not something that you ought to be sitting in and staying in and making a permanent part of your life, right? And so I think the discomfort and the healthy shame is absolutely necessary. Doesn't mean you hate yourself, but you hate those circumstances. You want to get out of them, and that needs to be there for many people to get out of them. You find comfort in that, you're going to have real problems, and you will be a burden on the state, and you'll be a burden to yourself. You won't be actualizing your potential as a human being.
Yeah, and I don't think that people will be deep down happy with that. I feel like, we all have a purpose on this earth, whatever that may be, and that's not helping people find it. It's just more like a numbing and a distraction to just, like you said, to keep them comfortable. And I don't know. I find a distaste in that. I think there's a balance between, hey, sink or swim, you're on your own, have a nice life. And, also just like, okay, we're going to pay for everything for you for the rest of your life. Like there's gotta be something in the middle. It was interesting that you brought that up, that I was like, wow, this is somebody who used the assistance properly, how it's designed, and got back up. That's what I was hoping that, that other people could do. So to maybe hopefully be inspired from your story, if anyone's listening.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, that was probably one of the toughest chapters for me to write because I'm embarrassed, absolutely embarrassed by it still. I mean, I have a hard time actually invoking failure rule number 5, you were not your failures, to that circumstance, right? It's very hard to decouple my identity from that failure of having to be on public assistance. Ultimately, I've done that. But I debated whether I even wanted to reveal that and let people know that about me in the book. And ultimately, I decided it was important. It was important that I speak about my thoughts on the topic and
Well,
detail my
yeah,
experience.
that always makes for the best books is when people are most transparent and open. I mean, with the closed and you just try to paint a picture of your life was great and perfect. It's like, that's not real, because people will relate to this more because everybody's gone through that. I mean, I was a counselor for 17 years. I've heard way worse stories where people were on assistance and they never got off of it. And that's to me, that's way worse and so frustrating. So I thought it was cool in your book that you talk about that and how you moved past it. And like you said, there was other examples of that too. So just kind of neat to hear that, hopefully inspiring for some people.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. What is the other thing you talk about? Because like this kind of goes back to that, like using the shitty cards that you're dealt to motivate yourself. I think that is something that a lot of people don't understand, because we all get cards dealt in life and we don't get to choose those. You could be born super good looking and super athletic and super rich, and some people are born poor. But if you have bad cards, you can use that as fuel to motivate you. So I feel like that's almost an advantage for some people. A lot of the stories that I've heard, a lot of the most successful people had horrible upbringings, terrible things that, through the Holocaust and things like that, where they lived through that. And then they use that as an inspiration to do that. Talk about that. Yeah. How people can use bad cards that they're dealt to motivate themselves.
Yeah. So, that quote that I used there was, a conversation between Joe Rogan and Tim Pool in the Joe Rogan show. And, I think of like, you're right. I think that is a key component to many very motivating stories of people that ascended to greatness. I mean, David Goggins being one of them. I mean, you have
yes,
there.
perfect.
His background of the abuse, the racism he encountered, abuse of his father, the alcoholism of his father, the all the things that he had to overcome that drove him, and it was channeling that anger into those healthy pursuits that made him who he was. I don't believe he'd be who he was if he didn't have that background. Now you could have somebody else with that background, and they're going to crumble, and they're going to disintegrate, and they're going to fall into addiction, and they're going to continue cycles. So it really is up to the individual. But I do think that more often than not, a lot of these great stories of ascension come from that. Certainly people of privilege, of means, of advantages can still become great, for sure. That happens. But it's also, I think, the reason that we look at those that have advantages and privilege and means, and when they don't use it, it's so sad, because you compare that to somebody that didn't have that and found a way through grit and determination and sheer defiance of their circumstances to ascend into greatness. And so I think it makes it even more sad when you see somebody who has advantages and fails to use them to lift themselves up and to find their highest usefulness in the world.
Yeah. And one of the things you said in here that I wrote down, this is really simple, but a big sign of success, perseverance. I mean, it really is so simple. I feel like it's a kind of a lost concept for a lot of people, especially this younger generation. It's like, okay, I graduated college. I'm ready to be the CEO now. And it's like, they don't understand. You got to like keep going and go. Again, the book, you're going to fail several times along the way, but you have to keep going. And that's a lesson that I've tried to understand and learn myself. Cause I would get frustrated if I wasn't good at something right away. I would just be like, okay, screw this. I'm done. I'll try something else. But I think a lot of times you got to, fail, pick yourself back up and just keep persevering, keep going. And that's why I started this podcast. I was like, okay, I'm giving this at least 5 years before I decide if it was worth it or not.
Right.
And,
you have
I'm year 4. So
that's right. So I'm going to cut you off, but it's a long time frame. That's right. You need that horizon, right? I mean, people are like, oh, how's the book done? I'm like, well, it only came out 3 months ago. It's exactly where it needs to be, where I expected it to be at this stage. But I won't really know what it is for like another 3 years, because it's a multi-year plan. You have to give it time. There's going to be a lot of experimentation and failures of attempts to promote the book in that time frame. And same with the pot. You have to give things time. You have to keep going back at it, keep turning to it. It's the idea of pivoting, right? Which is an overused term, but essentially that's not changing your vision, but iterating your strategy along the way to reach the vision. And that's what you have to do. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They expect this linear ascension, stair climb. It's not how it is, man. It's often a zigzag. It's a climb 3 steps, get knocked down 2,
Yes.
get pushed sideways, get a crawl back sideways, climb up 3 more. Oh shit, that step's got a hole in it. I mean, it's all an adventure, man. It's all going to be full of peril, and you're constantly going to have to overcome. And for me, like listening to hardcore music, that's been a strength for me, because a lot of the music I listen to, main theme is overpower, overcome. It's keep going. It's perseverance, like the Hatebreed album, Perseverance. That's like a key theme that always keeps me going. I almost enjoy the challenge of I do. I enjoy the challenge of that.
No, that's perfect. I love what you said about you take 3 steps and then get knocked down. I just remember like one of my first big guests, I had David Duchovny, actor, on my show. And I was like, I made it. I'm a huge podcaster now. I've got David Duchovny, and it's like, yeah, like the David Duchovny guests, they don't come along like every week. So it's like, okay, kind of get knocked down a few, climb back up, get some bigger guests. But yeah, it goes like that. You're right. You take a few steps up and then a few steps down. The other part of this chapter I really liked was when you talk about accepting division in failure and staying great, like you say how the best art divides the audience, like half people will love it, half the people will hate it. Because if everyone's just in agreement with everything, it's usually not that great. It's very bland. I kind of struggle with this. I'll be honest with you, because on the one hand, I think sometimes I'm like, I want my podcast to bring people together, but I also worry because I'm like, well, I don't want to get political in my podcast and state my opinions that might be divisive. I mean, we're talking about like the welfare thing. I'm like, I probably could lose some people for my views on that. But see, I also think like, well, I got to be authentic. So how do you kind of balance that?
For me, I balance it by, especially when you talk about political stuff, by going back to personal ethos, right? I think, the old saying that politics is downstream from culture. Well, I think culture is downstream from personal ethos. So just forget about politics and all of that. Just talk about the philosophical root considerations of an issue. And people can have political extractions all day long for that, but it's about the actual conversation. I mean, if somebody just listened to our conversation about public assistance, I think it'd be hard for an intellectually honest person to paint anything we just talked about as being, I don't know, really political or even hateful or anything like that, right? And I think at the same time, authenticity has to still be, the highest value, and authenticity, with integrity, right? I mean, there could be people who are authentic assholes. I mean, that's not really a good thing, right? But
there's a lot of those. Those are all the top podcasters.
Right. So, I mean, authenticity with some humility, authenticity with some integrity, authenticity still with an open mind, right? Without being stuck in these ideological ruts. Doesn't mean that you don't have ideology, but over-identifying with that stuff, I think really holds us back.
Because I think that it's like, how do you stand out, right? Because I feel like in this market right now, in terms of whether you're talking about social media, movies, TV, music, podcasts, books, it's a flooded market with all that stuff. So how do you stand out? So I feel like the people that stand out the most are the craziest. I mean, you look at like what was one of the biggest stories a week ago is, Andrew Tate is trolling Greta Thunberg, and she rips him and says he has a small dick energy and all this. And that was this huge, that tweet, I don't know how many millions of views and likes that thing had, but it's two people just being nasty to each other. What?
Does that impact anybody's life? I mean, does that really matter to us, right? I mean, that's
right, but that's how they're both two of the most famous people right now. So it's frustrating because I'm like, I want to do the right thing. I want to bring people together. I want to help people. I want to help people find their own purpose, their thing one and thing two and all that. And it's just like, do I need to be an asshole to do that? I don't want to be an asshole because that's not being authentic to myself.
No, you're right. This is not a simple topic. But I think what I'm talking about in the book is when divisiveness is an unavoidable byproduct of you being authentic with integrity, where it's unavoidable. I'm not talking about seeking out divisiveness. I mean, that's what you're talking about. Many people who exploit divisiveness to become famous, to get attention.
Yeah.
Totally not talking about that. I'm talking about being authentic with integrity, hoping that it will bring people together, but not watering it down or diminishing it in fear that it also might divide. And then being at peace with divisiveness if it naturally comes, because you're at peace with what you created or what you put out in the world. and you did it with the right intentions, and it's authentic, and it's truly what you believe or truly what you need to express. I mean, the quote you mentioned there was from Rick Rubin, the record producer, right? And I talk about some of the artists that he has on his, from his, who he's worked with. I mean, and the dichotomies of them, but many of them were divisive, but they were all authentic. And many of them, I mean, you think of the politics of Kid Rock versus Eminem, very different. You think of the religious orientations of Slayer versus Johnny Cash, very different, right? But they were all produced by Rick Rubin, all a little bit edgy and divisive, but authentic and with integrity, right? And I think that's the kind of idea I'm talking about, is just don't diminish or water down your art because you're trying to be all things to all people. At the same time, don't be divisive for the sake of being divisive, because that's really going to be, a shallow output and really not do anybody any good, I don't think.
Yeah. It just seems like now everything is divided, whether we want it to or not. Like everything will be like, people get put into a category. Oh, you're a conservative. Oh, you're a liberal, regardless of, oh, you're hanging out with this person. What was it like? It was like Ellen DeGeneres hanging out with George Bush. People went apeshit. Like, what is she doing hanging out with a horrible person like that? And then, people, his fans or followers or whatever, are saying, why are you hanging out with Ellen DeGenerate? And, it's like this hatred for each other instead of, like you said, I love that Rick Rubin works with a variety of people, with, conservative guy like Johnny Cash, who's Christian, and then like Slayer, who's clearly not right. Christian. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just to give you a very personal example. So I'm in what is essentially a bipartisan interfaith marriage, right? So I'm more libertarian oriented, slightly to the right. I am a Christian, although I probably not a good one. I smoke, drink, but I am, and I don't go to church or anything like that, but spiritual in that regard. My wife is a staunch Democrat. She is Jewish by ethnicity, but she's not religious. She's more agnostic, more associates with the Buddhist philosophy as a practical living guideline. And you know what? Those are things that we learn from each other on. We never changed each other. We've never tried to change each other. We respect each other deeply. We don't argue over those things. I mean, if the world could be like our marriage, it'd be great. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's kind of where I come from. I love
that. That's why I do the podcast. Yeah.
I can retain my own ideas, but be open to other ones and learn from them. I still, learn things about Buddhism, the things that do not conflict with my own faith, and add to them. I find lots of wisdom in. There's things from all over the political spectrum that I can find value on, right? I think the idea of putting on a jersey for one side or the other of any sort of dichotomy is limiting. And I think you can have an open mind, but still have some core beliefs that rarely change. They still might change, but you can still have kind of some abiding core beliefs and be open to the idea that there's some nuances you need to learn that might inform how you change over time.
Yeah, I think if just people can listen to each other, I think it'd be better for the world, but also for themselves, because I think you can learn a lot from listening to people who are different than you, people, different backgrounds. I mean, I've learned so much from doing this podcast, talking to people of all sorts of different backgrounds, and it's fascinating. I love hearing their opinions. And even though sometimes I might not agree, sometimes they say things in a funny, I've had some comedians who are super liberal and I think they're hilarious. I've had Ted Nugent, who is clearly not liberal, and I think he's hilarious. Like, they're just really interesting people. So I love that. I love that. And you do a good job of that in the book. You have, Stephen Colbert, and you have people who are conservative that you show examples. It's not biased in any way. It's very both sides, which is really cool. Here's a question I had for you that wasn't really in the book, or maybe a little bit, maybe it is kind of in the book and maybe it's just not a certain chapter, but like knowing when to shift. Like I heard Joe Rogan talking about this. I can't remember who he was talking to, but he was talking about how success is kind of like what you were saying. It's not always linear. And sometimes you have to kind of change paths. Like, how do you know when to not necessarily maybe give up, but maybe shift your strategy? Like with my podcast, for example, let's say after 5 years, I go, well, it didn't really turn out the way I wanted it to. that doesn't necessarily mean I need to give up on the podcast. Maybe it means I need to shift it and to do a different format or different kinds of guests or make it a murder podcast. I don't know. Like, how do you know when it's time to shift something though?
I don't know that there's a formula to know how to know when to know, right? But I do think that if you go into it with the knowledge that you have to be flexible and you have to make a plan, but with an intent to iterate, right? So I have a chapter, make a plan with intent to iterate, really. And it's taking kind of these two quotes, like the one from Peter Thiel from 0 to 1, where he says, a bad plan is better than no plan at all. You have to have a plan. And then Mike Tyson, plan's great until you get punched in the mouth. Right. So it's like, on the one hand, have a plan, have a framework, go after something, but prepare to iterate when you get punched in the mouth or when things don't work. And I think if you go into it with that attitude, you're already setting yourself up with, the flexibility underneath the unchanging overarching goal. So you have that overarching goal, and maybe even you have criteria by which you abandon that overarching goal, but it's over time after a certain amount of reasonable iteration. Right. And so I think it's thinking about it in that way. So for me with the book, it's like, all right, here's my overarching goal to build an audience over 3 to 5 years so that when I write future books, there's a built-in audience to learn how to market a book. That goal is not going to change at least for 3 to 5 years, and I'll reevaluate. Within those 3 to 5 years, there's all kinds of things I'm going to do to try to reach that goal. And they're going to shift around based on success and risk and spend and all these other things. And I'm going to play in that sandbox for 3 to 5 years and then evaluate the overarching goal. So if you're thinking of things in that kind of structured way with layers and if this, then that, I think then that's a good way to set yourself up, either for success or to learn a whole lot, and potentially through that process, find the adjacent possible and figure out what you need to do in terms of shifting at any certain inflection point.
How did you learn how to write a book, get signed to a publisher, market the book? How did you learn all this stuff?
I'm still learning. I'm just figuring it out. I mean, the book was like, Ryan Holiday, the great, author who's popularized Stoicism, who I love. I mean, he talks about, writing a book is 2 marathons. The first marathon is the writing, the production, the iconography of the book, the editing, all of that stuff. There's a lot that goes into that. It took me 7 years to write this, over a year with the editing process, with the editing team over at Lioncrest Publishing. So that was a huge marathon. That was a learning experience in of itself. Then it's like the baton gets passed. Now it's a second marathon. Now I got to learn how to sell the book, build an audience, do the podcast, the media tour, figure out what works there, figure out how to fine tune an Amazon ad campaign, figure out all the other ways to monetize it, coaching, speaking, hopefully at some point online courses, the merchandise company, all these other things. It's going to take a long time. So people are like, oh, well, you ready to write the next book? I'm like, not till I learn how to optimally sell books in general. So, this is my 100% focus, is to figure out how to do that over the next 3 to 5 years. So I don't have the answer to that. I don't know that anybody has a surefire answer, but there is a lot of help out there, and I'm looking to as many mentors as I can to help me do that. People who've gone through it in the space and have their own unique wisdom to share.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Love to hear it. Here's a random question though, since we're wrapping up here. I did want to ask you about like cigars. So I'm like a novice. I occasionally like a good cigar. What's a good cigar to start with?
I would go with something, light to medium bodied, or something with the Connecticut wrapper. I wouldn't go hitting a double or triple Maduro. It might make you sick. But, for me, I like a lot of box press cigars. I'm smoking a My Father right now. This is one of my favorite brands. I like a lot of their different sticks, very light and fluffy, delicious, and burns well and holds a good ash. You just got to kind of try it out. I think best to like touch and feel and try them out and go to your local tobacconist and see what they recommend and go from there. For me, I think you can find a lot of good sticks that are in like the $8 to $12 range. You don't want to go lower than that. You're going to be smoking trash bags. And if you go too high, you're probably spending money on something that, maybe you're not there yet, So
are the Cubans, is that really worth it? Or is that just like a urban legend? Is it really, are the Cubans really the best cigars?
I mean, they're not bad. They're just from a different country. But I mean, the tobacco coming out of the Dominican and Nicaragua works quite well for me. So I think it's kind of a forbidden fruit thing.
Okay. Gotcha. Cool. Well, I always end each episode promoting a charity. I think you do have one, right?
Yeah. So if I think of charities, one that I always think is really cool is Dennis Leary, who was
Yeah.
in that show Rescue Me in the mid
Yeah.
2000s, one of my favorite shows ever. He has the Leary's Firefighters charity to help the firefighters. I would say that would be a charity that.
Okay. That's cool because I've already promoted that like twice because I had on Michael Lombardi, who was in Rescue Me, and he promoted that. And then what's that?
Nice. You had him on the show. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, he was in this movie, The Retaliators, and I think I had the screenwriters on from that movie too. I think they might have promoted that one as well. So cool. I think that's awesome. Hopefully people will donate to that one. And of course, buy your book. I got it on, I got a free copy of the PDF, but then I saw it was on Audible and I was like, I have credits on there. So I was like, I just got it on Audible. It's way easier. I listened at double speed and just flew right through it. It was amazing. So I recommend it. Good stuff. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. Anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, I would just say go to andrewthorpking.com. No E on the end of Thorpe. From there, you can get into everything I'm doing. Connect with me on Instagram. Connect to my YouTube channel where I have a lot of produced videos kind of animating the ideas of the book. My merchandise company, Soul on Fire Supply Company, kick-ass designs that echo the ethos of the book. Also, you can sign up for a free Failure Rules mini course at the website where you'll get some good distilled content, and then you'll get weekly emails from me with some failure wisdom nuggets. Yeah, I would say that's it.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much. I'll get this episode up soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Chuck.
See you later, Andrew. Bye-bye.
See you.
My thanks again to Andrew and his publicist for setting this up. The book is available on Amazon, or if you'd like to listen like me, then I recommend getting it on Audible. Buy the book, write a nice review, post about it on social media, help Andrew out. Speaking of helping people out, make sure to follow Andrew on Instagram or Twitter. You can follow me too on there if you haven't already. Of course, your likes, shares, comments, all that stuff help out on social media and also on YouTube. So make sure to subscribe to my podcast wherever you listen. I recommend YouTube because that's where I'm focused on growing the most right now. I appreciate all your support for myself and for the guests. Have a great day and shoot for the moon.